possibility to present this. I haven't asked, is this would be like English a preferred language?
As you like it. As you like it. If there will be any clarifications needed, I can translate for the audience.
Okay, thank you very much. Today I want to say a few words about the early wagons, early wheeled vehicles, and their usage in a combat, and how we can actually trace it in the archaeological context. This is like the main work that I'm doing now on my PhD. So steppe array is very good place actually to make this kind of research, because we have a lot of findings of the real vehicles. This is like the grave findings. They come from cemeteries, so they have also a very well established context, because it also shows how people like perceived this. And I collected here 127 finds in total. They come mostly from the Yamnaya, Katakomna, and Sintashta Petrovka graves. And also I use as additional sources rock art and parts of Bridle, everything that actually can lead to everything that was an evidence of the usage of wagons or carts or chariots. And the earliest finds, this is actually a very good source, because the earliest finds can be dated both on like radiocarbon chronology and the inner chronology of the steppe cultures to the late 4th millennium BC. And I have to admit there that there must be some time between the appearing of the wagons and the start of the research in this area. Must be some time to come. Must be some time since this invention appeared in the burial rite, so they had to be used for some time already. And the latest could be dated to around 16th century BC. This is like the early Andronovo culture, and that just means this tradition is very long lasting. And we can actually read a lot out of this. This presented here is like one of the earliest wagon graves from Yamnaya culture from the north.
Justyna, sorry to interrupt you. Do you change slides because we don't see it? What slide are you on? What slide are you on now? Because we still see at the next slide.
I have this slide with a picture of the wagon, and it says earliest wagons, and it is visible that I'm changing them now, or
no.
Okay, so I tried to do this in another way, and I'm just gonna share my screen, and I hope it's gonna help. The whole screen. Okay. Okay, and now it's fine?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so this is what I was saying now, basically. So I think this is one of the earliest wagons from like around the transition from 4th millennia from Yaski, which is like basically the evidence is here is the early Yamnaya type of dagger inside of this grave. And considering my material, I just wanted to check if there's a traces of the usage of the wagons in combat, and actually how we can determine it. So this is the map of the Yamnaya graves, and we can see here there were some areas of concentration of these findings, and I have to admit that some of these findings, they also they were also concentrated on some specific sites, on some specific kurgan cemeteries. Like in some cases, there was like 2 or 3 findings on one. And here we have like I collected 49 findings. And here's the catacomb era graves. The situation is similar. I have 50. And they were also concentrated mostly in some specific areas and also on some specific sites where it's even more strong visible, because there are sites where there were like 6 or 7 found. So first, I want to say a few words about the 4-wheeled vehicles. And they were the only type known that we can recognize from Yamnaya graves. Actually, there were also some findings on some single, just some single wheels, but there were no traces of the usage of another types of for Yamnaya. So we can only admit they definitely knew the 4-wheeled wagons. And some they were also found in catacomb graves culture cemeteries, but and they wrote here that they were more detailed, but actually it is just probably a matter of the context, how they were buried, because sometimes the difference is in Yamnaya graves we have only dismantled wagons. They were never put as a whole in a grave. No, it was never for vehicles. Sometimes there were only wheels in some specific plan. They were placed mostly in the corners of the grave pit. While from catacomb grave culture, this picture is way more diverse, because on the one side we have like the wagons that were put as whole, and on the other hand we have only the findings of the wheels, which is also makes it very complicated. And there were only the very heavy wheels used. They could only make like few kilometers per hour, and only the heavy 1 piece or 3 pieces wheels were known. Sometimes they had a hole in the disc, maybe to make the construction more established or lighter. Actually, maybe it was a try. And there were, for both of the cultures, there were mostly the male graves, but not necessarily, because from the catacomb graves there were also some collective graves. And this data is only applied to a 4-wheeled vehicles. And from the early vehicles in general comes also the weapons, as I said, because I want to check their possibility of the usage in combat. So I was checking if any of the context actually can lead to this result. So from Yamnaya graves, we have only the single weapons. There was no sets of weapons. So the total amount of weapons in these graves is made like 10 findings, and there was mostly the daggers, which is quite controversial, because daggers are considered to be pretty multifunctional tools for this era. So this could be used just like this can be just for daily usage, or they could be also used in combat. The more significant here are arrowheads, because sometimes they were found between the bones of deceased person. So that kind of can mean that this person took a part in some kind of combat, maybe some personal combat. And one pretty obvious finding is also the spearhead that I will show now. And the situation is very, very complicated for the catacomb graves. I put this all type of weapons that was found in any of these catacomb graves. I will just show the specific types in a minute. Specific types of graves which combined what type of weapons, if it even combined. And of course, the most common category made by daggers, as I said, is controversial, because I think in this case, how the dagger was used is only determined by its context. And I cannot say for sure that if there were dagger, I can consider it as a weapon. This was the most common type of the metal object in the catacomb graves in general. So in some situations there was double daggers, but still hard to say. There were the same situations with flat axes, because this can be used in both contexts. There was an arrowheads and axes, and the axes seems to be most significant because they were always combined with another type of weapon, and also this is the first of these categories that can be for sure used in a combat with another human. And I have to admit that for both of these cultures, both of the societies, in these graves that I analyzed, there were lack on some specific categories of weapons. For Yamnaya, for example, there was a lack of axes, and for the Catacomb we don't have, for example, the mace heads. So this complex is not full. Here's an example. This Sofivka is like Yamnaya grave. This is a spearhead. This is like late Yamnaya grave actually, because the spearhead is a catacomb type. And two daggers of daggers. I'm sorry, not daggers. Axes of the catacomb culture of different types from different areas, and one of the set, what they call set, because this is like the set of the axe combined with a single arrowhead, but this arrowhead actually here was found between the bones of the deceased person in the grave. So this also determines that it was probably used in combat. For me, from my perspective, the very problematic finds are actually the finds of the single wheels. Of course, for Yamnaya, it's a bit less complicated, because for Yamnaya, there were in the graves where we found like a bit more of the details of the wagon. We can only admit the new 4-wheeled wagons, but in catacomb era, they also knew the 2-wheeled carts, which I show in a minute. And these findings of a single wheel that was usually used as a cover for an entrance to the grave pit is more complicated, because actually there were like 3 graves from Zamożne, which is a Zaporizhia area, where we find the axes in the weapon set. So this is like a question if the single wheel should be read as a symbol of which type of wagon, which type of vehicle was used actually, for which type of wagon this will come from. Because definitely it's a wagon grave, but we cannot determine what type and with which type this weapon were combined in this context, because these three weapon sets that I mentioned before, 3 other ones, they come from the graves that contained the 4-wheeled wagons, not 2-wheeled wagons. So there were also the first 2-wheel carts, characteristic for the catacomb graves. They come mostly from the territory of today's Ukraine. And we have some radiocarbon dates actually that determine the first usage probably to like half of the first 3rd century BC and younger. And mostly they had like the square wagon body, and in some cases, like Tiagonowa Mohyła that I had like on previous presentation mentioned, the back of the wagon was opened, as in chariot. This square body was also characteristic for Ipatovo, for example. There was just like square body with probably we can assume this was the as the draft animals, the bulls were used there, and they had a very mixed type of grave inventory. I cannot really combine them with findings of the weapons because we have only a flat X and double X's, double daggers. So this is not so obvious for interpretation if they could be used in combat or not. And two of these graves were analyzed also by anthropologists, and Ipatov was a May grave, and Tegnova Mohyła was a collective grave with two May graves, like two bodies were identified as a male, and one as a woman and one as a child. So but the authors like assumed this wagon was connected to the one of the male bodies. So this is the proposition how they can be used, but we cannot be sure. For this is like the findings from similar time from different areas. This is like the Yenisei Basin, and we see the people sitting. This is, I know this is very like schematic picture, but still what they meant is probably the two-wheeled wagon with a sitting driver. As in Wojkowo, we have also another sitting driver's graves from catacomb culture, but they were like four-wheeled wagons. And also the bulls were used as draft animals. We can kind of base it on the Ejivka finding. But we can see this type of wagons are a bit different because this is like this wagon, this cart was in a shape of triangle, and this was more characteristic for more like mountainous areas. Like we can find this type of cart on the Caucasus, while here we have like the two-wheeled wagon. From the Middle East, one of the earliest findings, one of the earliest proofs. But this cart is we see here the onagers, some early equids were used as a draft animal. So considering this data, we can probably think that this catacomb carts, two-wheeled vehicles, were something in between of them. And the last period of it is made by the chariot era, basically. And as a chariot, I defined a vehicle with two-spoked wheels that had a horse carriage. This was the first time when horses were used as a draft animal, which we have a lot of evidence. I will show this. And in my work, I mostly consider the findings of the real vehicles, the trace of usage of real vehicles, but the complex was way more broad than these three cultures because it was also connected to Potapovka, Pokrovka, Erythrovnaya, Alakul cultures, where the findings of the horse bones and cheek pieces, for the first time, the oldest cheek pieces were found. We could probably assume this whole complex can be dated to like late first century, first part of the millennium, first part of the second millennium BC, which is kind of based also on radiocarbon data, because this grave, as I put an example, is not the oldest grave. We can see there were like older graves that can be connected to this complex, and how these graves actually look like, because we don't really see how these chariots can be could look like, because they were only found as an attempt to show the whole horse carriage in a grave. In the back of the grave, probably the wagon body were placed, but we can only see the pits for the wheels, with still traces of the spoked wheels. And on the opposite side, we can find sometimes the horse bones, and this just looks like a carriage. And the size of this graves also determines the size of the possible chariot that was placed there. So this is the area where these findings come from, the graves. They were also placed sometimes like few on the one cemetery. So this is like this tradition contains totally different types of vehicles, but in the same time, this also the same pattern. And what we have here is the total of like 13 graves contained any type of weapons, and this was like all weapons that I mentioned, but also something some that never appeared before in the graves of like vehicle graves, which is, for example, the mace heads. And the sets were put in like 9 graves, and I have to admit, like 3 of the graves were completely robbed. We have also in 9 graves there was also cheek pieces, and in 18 there were also horse bones. And also most of these graves contain, also all of the graves that was analyzed by anthropologists, they contained the bodies of the male individuals. So I have to, what we see there in comparing to the previous eras, that this complex is very established. What I mean is that this type of inventory was not only connected to a deceased person, but also to each other together. Like the wagons were connected to findings of the weapons and horses and the cheek pieces, not only to the person that was deceased. This is like how we can find out how they look like. Is of course the analogies from the another territories. The Saimalitage, this is like the dated to probably around the half of the 2nd millennium or the second half of the 2nd millennium, and this is pretty close. It's like outside of this wagon graves area because this is southern Kazakhstan, but we have a lot of evidence there. We can see the shapes. We can see the whole carriage. They were drawn by horses. And also some help is also the findings from the Middle East, the evidence from the Middle East, but I have to admit they're much younger, but we see the same traces, basically. Similar shape of and size of the wagon's body, and also the yokes were used for draft animals, the spoked wheels. Also some of this like rock art, Central Asian rock art, on some of these pictures, there were also like spoked wheels marked. So, and also what we see there are drivers, so we can see they also have weapons. What I had to admit there, they will never like we can never find any a picture of chariot from the Central Asia which would be placed in a fighting context. There's never like any scene of the chariots fighting with each other. Mostly they were like static, or they were put in some hunting context. So I can put now. I can go now to results. So of course the biggest difference is between Sintashta and the previous context, older context actually than Sintashta. This is like the where we can put some kind of border, because in Sintashta we can see the weapons and the horse bones connected to a chariot, actually, which we cannot really see in the previous graves, but we see already some kind of changes. We see the amount of weapons in the catacomb graves was bigger, and actually the two-wheeled carts appeared in this era, and they were like pretty early considering how early they were, for example, in the Middle East and other areas. The problem is I couldn't find any grave from this time that could contain both, like weapon and two with wagon. So for now, I cannot say for sure, but I still think the roots of this tradition that we see in the late Bronze Age can be connected to what happened before in the steppe area, not necessarily in Middle East, especially that chariots are older and they were probably invented in steppe area. So now this is like where I took the illustrations and the radiocarbon dates from. And thank you for the attention.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Шановні колеги, якщо у когось є запитання, то можете поставити, я перекладу для пані Юстини. Okay, so there is no question from the audience. I have a question on camera about the animals that carried this all this transport. As understood, mostly those were horses, but also there's some cases where those were not horses, but as from one side we can determine that those could be, for example, bulls. So how was it spread if there's no possibility of knowing?
I would say like the horses, we see the first traces of the horses used as a draft animal in the Sintashta graves, connected already to chariot. And this is also based on the rock art and evidence from the other neighboring areas. And I think because we don't see any other animal bones than bulls in the catacomb or Yamnaya graves, and we also see the bulls used as a draft animals in the Yenisei Basin rock art. I would say this first fourth and third millennia in the steppe, there was only like bulls or oxen used as a draft animals, and from Sintashta times there were horses. Actually, they were probably also domesticated in this area, so it fits. But to be honest, this inventory of the horse bridle and this appears pretty rapid already, like in this context. So this is also a question still to be resolved, when actually and how, but we can just make a pretty straight line there. So the bulls in the early and middle Bronze Age, and since the late middle Bronze Age and late Bronze Age, there were horses. But actually, sometimes for the four-wheeled wagons, probably the bulls and other types of draft animals were in usage, but for chariots, only the horses.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Що ж, якщо більше питань нікого немає, thank you once again for your participation.